Welcome to this first 2023 edition of Tennessee Concrete Conversations, a podcast created and managed by the Tennessee Concrete Association. My name is Alan Sparkman. I'm Executive Director for the Tennessee Concrete Association, and I want to talk a few minutes this morning about the outlook for 2023, specifically for the construction and concrete industries. When we look at the coming year, it's hard not to think back about what we experienced in 2022. We started off early last year dealing with cement allocations in much of our state, which spread throughout the Southeast and most of the country as we went through the summer. So a big question on everybody's mind is, will we see that again in 2023? So let's talk about that first. Obviously, it's difficult and dangerous to predict the future. But as we look out toward 2023 and the cement supply situation, it appears that we should be in better shape for the coming year than we were last year. There is some new cement production capacity that has come online in the Southeast, which will certainly be a help in our area. And that capacity will also provide some new tonnage to at least parts of Tennessee. We also expect that there may be a slight easing in terms of volume demands in 2023. That is not to say that we're expecting a construction recession, because most parts of the state still have very strong backlogs and new work coming down the pipeline. But especially with residential demand, we do expect to see at least a flattening and possibly a slight decrease in residential demand for concrete. So in terms of cement supply, that will give us a little bit of a cushion. Cement suppliers report that they are in a better position as we head into this new year than perhaps they were at this time last year. So that's also a positive sign for our Tennessee markets. But I would say this, we don't have a lot of slack. We don't have a lot of room for things to go wrong. So just like in 2022, we saw some breakdowns at cement mills that service our part of the country. And when we get that kind of shock to the system, we don't have a lot of resilience. So assuming that everybody stays online and that production can continue at a normal pace, then I think we have a little better outlook for the coming year. We also saw in 2022 a host of other things that we really hadn't experienced before. And I think we are more likely going forward to continue to see that kind of event than we ever have been. Some examples of that from last year, we saw later in the year, just as we thought we were getting out of the woods with cement supply, we saw barge traffic on the Mississippi River come almost to a halt because of low water levels in the river. That had impacts on us in Middle Tennessee. Fortunately, they were not nearly as severe as they could have been. But other parts of the country served by the Mississippi River barge traffic experienced issues not only with cement, but also with aggregates. And in some cases, basic commodities like diesel fuel. The lesson for me is that as we head into the future, those types of things that we've never experienced before are more and more likely. In some ways, it's very similar to weather events that we see that are unusual, at least in our lived experience. We see stronger storms, more rains, more flood, extended periods of drought. I think we're going to see some of the same types of things just in the general business environment, things we don't expect, perhaps haven't planned for. So I think everyone needs to look toward the new year, I think with optimism, because I think the construction market, especially in Tennessee, is still strong and dynamic. And that's a huge positive for us. But as you make your plans, as you decide what work you want to commit your scarce resources to, you need to take into account that there are things beyond your control, and you don't want to become liable for those things. So be really careful about how you bid work and the commitments you make, because I think we're subject, again, if we look at 2022 as a very recent example, we had issues with obtaining cement, which we've already talked about. Many of our producers experienced similar issues with admixtures. And then in some cases, not so much in Tennessee, we had experiences with aggregates. We continue to have huge issues with having enough people. So workforce was certainly an issue in 2022. And I think that is one area where things are not likely to get better. In fact, I expect that workforce issues are going to continue to get worse because there aren't enough people coming into the industry to replace the large number, particularly of baby boomers who are aging out and retiring. So this is going to be a huge restriction, not just for construction, not just for concrete, but for all businesses going forward. Finding people is going to be more difficult. It's going to cost more to find those people, and we're going to have to get a whole lot better in our industry at keeping the people that we have. So I think this will be a key challenge that we face in 2023 and the years beyond. So while we hope that challenges with regard to obtaining materials when we need them in the quantities that we need them, we hope those will be less in 2023 than what we experienced last year. But another big issue with materials will be variability in those materials. So with cement, we may see, and we often do, particularly in the summer, that the cement from brand X may be coming from their terminal, but it's not coming from their mill. It may be imported, and that source of the import could actually change from month to month at any given mill. We've known that for a long time, but that variability, especially as we transition to type 1L cements in most markets, could certainly be a factor in the way that our mixes perform. Same would go for fly ash, which is increasingly hard to source in a reliable manner. So that's going to be a continuing factor that we need to deal with. And we may see some changes perhaps in aggregate supplies, although Tennessee is in pretty good shape for aggregates for the foreseeable future. Those changes, that as the materials that make up our mixes change, the performance of our mixes typically changes as well. That brings more risk to ready-mix producers, and it brings potential headaches to customers of concrete, especially flat work contractors. So it's really important as we deal with those changes that we communicate perhaps better than we have in the past. We can't rely on just luck to hope that it works out, because sometimes the risk here and the dollars involved are quite large. So I think it may require all of us, so ready-mix producers, our primary suppliers, cement, aggregate, fly ash, as well as our customers, our contractors, the communication that we need to have between all of us in the concrete supply chain needs to improve so that none of us find ourselves in difficult situations not being able to provide the quality that we want to the final owner. So we've seen some challenges with that in the past year, and that's not just a Tennessee issue. I was recently at the World of Concrete, and one of the big issues in the hallways and in a few of the seminars was the transition to type 1L cement. That's well underway throughout the country. Most people, most ready-mix producers in Tennessee are now using a type 1L, and there's very little availability of classic type 1 cement in our part of the country. So that's not something that ready-mix producers can change, but we're seeing in some areas some pretty significant problems that ultimately may or may not be traced back to type 1L cement, but there's some troubling variability that could be related to various type 1L cements. Right now, a couple of things that we know about type 1L that seem to be pretty well accepted from across the country. First is that type 1L cements have a higher water demand than their type 1 counterparts. Again, that seems to be well documented and not really in question. But higher water demand obviously puts some responsibility on ready-mix producers to maintain strength in the light of that higher water demand. Other issues that we hear about, set time, just initial set time, which is a big deal for finisher customers. And then in some areas, 28-day strengths have become much lower. We have not experienced that yet in Tennessee, but some areas of the country, and these are widely scattered, there have been significant reductions in 28-day strengths, again, with the most likely cause of that being type 1L cement. We also see that type 1L appears to be much more variable from source to source than what we're used to seeing with type 1 cements. We mentioned the variability that sometimes arises when cement is imported and we get different cements from different mills. That aside, with type 1L, there seems to be much more variability in set times and in strength development, just from domestic mill to domestic mill. So this has some pretty important implications as we go through this transition to type 1L cement. And what it probably means is that ready-mix producers have to do more testing. Hopefully their cement partners will help them in that testing to make sure that they're providing a similar product to the end users in terms of strength and set time development. But I think there's more changes here than perhaps many people anticipated. So there's going to need to be some work done on that as we go forward. The more difficult problems to solve with relationship to the switch to type 1L are in the contractor area. So there's lots of things that can cause concrete to act squirrely, if you will, on a slab pour. And there's a lot of variables that go beyond strength that are really important to the successful performance of concrete for contractor customers. So anything that has an impact on bleed rates, initial set time, drying shrinkage, all of those are hugely important to our customers, and they're hard to discern in the lab. Relatively speaking, it's much easier to do some work in the lab to determine any ingredient's impact on, let's say, strength or even set time. When it comes to how those changes will impact concrete in a 100,000 square foot slab in terms of finishability, those are harder answers to get at. But they're not unimportant. In fact, they're hugely important. And it's incumbent, I think, on all of us to work together as we go through this shift right now with cement from type 1 to type 1L. But I believe this is going to become a bigger issue for us as we go forward. We are going to continue to see changes in our basic materials, especially cements, and that's being driven in large part by sustainable construction, embodied carbon to be more specific. And it doesn't really matter where you land on that, whether that's important or unimportant. The fact is that's the way we're headed. And I don't see that changing or reversing. So I don't think we're going to see cement suppliers go back to producing type 1, for example. And there are lots of alternatives being discussed out there for ways to produce concrete without nearly as much embodied carbon in the mixes as we've seen. So I think that's going to bring a lot of variability. And the interface for that is the ready-mix concrete plant and the customer, especially large slab customers. So we're looking at some cooperative efforts here at TCA this year to try to give answers, hopefully in advance, or at least some guidance, if not specific answers, in the use of our product for concrete slabs. So just be aware of that as you look toward the new year, as you think about bidding. There's much more variability for all of us than there used to be. And that's going to require us to take some different types of actions to try to mitigate or manage that increased variability that we're all subject to. So I think it's going to be an interesting year for 2023. Looks like it's going to be a good year business-wise, so that's a very positive thing. But we are going to continue to deal with some challenges that we saw pretty clearly in 2022. We hope that some of those will be easier to deal with in the new year, but we are going to have to deal with them. And I think all of us are going to have to get better at how we manage that increasing variability inside of our own business organizations. A quick shout out for TCA's annual convention, which is coming up February 8th and 9th at the Cool Springs Marriott in Franklin, Tennessee. If you haven't signed up yet, there's still time. We have a great program which will help provide some context and some answers to some of the things that we've talked about this morning. Of course, we'll have our Design Awards luncheon banquet where we honor the best projects from the past year across the state. Always a great event. So encourage you to come. You can check out our website, which is tnconcrete.org, for registration for the convention, and of course to see this podcast and the others that we have produced with Tennessee Concrete Conversations. Thanks for being with us.